And I'd like to introduce the first of those, who is Lady Renee Young from the Royal Borough of Kensington in Chelsea, and she's going to talk to us about the challenges of retrofit.
Thank you, you've got me back again. So, hi, I'm Renee Young. I work for the Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea as my day job, and I'm going to be talking to you about a local authority perspective and what the challenges are and what we were doing at RBKC about retrofitting our properties. So, we've come through numerous changes, as I've spoken about earlier. As a sector, we've had so much change recently. We're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, climate changes, what we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, and more. So to meet the retrofit challenge, we need to significantly look at funding, effective technology, and a newly skilled workforce. So there are many challenges ahead when we look at retrofitting from a local authority perspective. Now, at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, we have got commitments to be net zero carbon by 2030, but also we've just had an announcement yesterday that was breaking news by Rishi Sunak about that could be extended and will be extended to 2035. So that means some of our programmes might slightly slow down, and it's not like going so fast. But for the whole borough, we've got to be carbon neutral by 2040, and that's what the plan that we've got in place. So at RBKC, we have a climate emergency action plan in place, and this plan sets out the approach and vision for us tackling the climate emergency by focusing on 6 different delivery areas. So those 6 areas on this slide are built environment and energy, sustainable transport and travel, places and greener borough, and people and partnerships. We've also got waste and circular economy. So by leading by example, we need to look at our existing buildings, upgrade to be more energy efficient and to use cleaner energy. And we have a housing investment standard that has made promises to commit to these net zero carbon goals. So as I've spoken about earlier, we've got a lot of increased regulation. It's becoming harder to balance the plates. The sector has had an awful lot of different legislation that has been passed through Parliament. There's also the new Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, Consumer Standards, Building Safety Act, and there will be a new 24-hour inspections coming for local authorities. The housing regulator with new procedures, local authorities will be put into something like league tables to compare their performances. I think our director said that it was a little bit like, football leagues and Premier 1, Division 1, 2 and things like that. So we're not sure how that will look like yet because we haven't got all the finer details. The Ombudsman, as you've heard from Alan this morning, have new powers which include complaints, which means tenants take the lead. There's also challenges over financing. How do we find the money and budget to effectively cover all of these huge costs when we take carbon zero approach? It's already stretching our tight budgets, so it's estimated that it will cost more than 60 billion to retrofit homes, plus we need to find ways to reduce the carbon footprint in challenging times where we have budget cuts to local authorities. Our grant funding and things like that can be complex and very lengthy. Often we need 100% surveying and access to properties, which can be a challenging thing when dealing with our residents and people. How will we finance this with our rents being capped at 5%? We have no other income. So will that mean more borrowing or selling off properties at already stretched stock? Stock conditions can also be a difficult challenge, especially where you have varying amount of tower blocks. And for us, with the promise of refurb rather than regeneration, or we have a high level of listed buildings within our borough, we need to think carefully and outside the box. We will need to look at selling off, perhaps we might need to look at selling off what doesn't meet the requirements. There's also increased level of complaints around damp and mould. We've touched on that this morning. We need to look at being balanced, and we now have a dedicated team that is a task force that deals with all of those things. We've also got things like we touched on before, like the cost of living crisis is a consideration. And then there are other challenges that are thrown into the mix, like things that have been beyond our control with contractual things and procurement and parts and products suddenly changing and increasing in value, or what we were quoted before, like a few months ago, has doubled. There's things that have become scarce. To also meet the retrofitting, there are many terms and techniques that are largely unfamiliar, and to retrofit just the UK social housing to net zero standards by 2050, we're going to need to look at another 500,000 additional trained tradespeople. There is a quantum leap in doing this. The Climate Change Committee identifies this skill gap as a prime barrier to reaching their Paris level accords. So the government published a social housing green paper, a new deal for social housing in 2018, and subsequently the social housing white paper and tenants charter in 2020, all with the aim of improving the social housing and how it's regulated. And as we've all spoken about this morning again, about the sad and tragic death of Awab Ishwaq in 2020, following the chronic exposure in Rochdale, it's highlighted the enormity of this issue UK-wide. Here at RBKC, we saw a 220% jump in reports for damp and mould alone. We deal with our cases on an individual basis. There are no assumptions. We have dedicated trained staff to assist to tackle this quantum leap. Occupancy factors are obviously taken into consideration, which includes overcrowding and the availability and use of ventilation and heating systems. There's also individual challenges and things that we can signpost as a local authority with things like disability, financial hardship, health conditions, and how we can try and assist those residents as much as we can. Damp and mould can be a complex and frustrating issue for both landlords and residents to resolve. We also know that within our sector, not all the cases we deal with have been easy or straightforward. We do need to challenge the narrative here, and this needs to be in partnership, and we've spoken before about collaboration with residents, and it cannot be done by us and the experts alone. We as officers and experts, with all the options that we can offer with diagnosis, can only go so far. We've also got older style buildings to think about, and how do we look at retrofitting them? How do we look at alternative options? And what cannot be changed? And therefore, do we make the sad decision to sell those assets off? So, when we look at occupancy and use of the property, it will give us an overall picture of what our stock looks like, what prioritisation we need to look at for the future. We look at residents' concerns and complaints and feedbacks. Then it's looking at the diagnostics and testing, and there's a wide range, as we know, out there of options that we can look at with thermal imaging, energy efficiency, and using experts to gather our evidence. It's important, again, to work in partnership with our residents, gathering the right evidence, having honest conversations with our residents, and what support that we can provide, like looking at money matters, opening community centres, how can they effectively look at moisture creation in their home, and education. I think there's also a lot that we do as officers in looking at signposting. So here at RBKC, we are taking a fabric first approach to improve the energy efficient and be gas free by removing all gas appliances when the properties become void, and any new homes that are built are now all fully electric. We're working to undertake a full 21st century specification to include walls, floors, windows, doors, everything, the general envelope of the fabric of the building, looking at fossil-free fuels, lighting, water, renewables. So when we quickly look at the average energy household usage, and then you consider the UK weather and over 50% of an average household energy usage, used for special heating, it means that a poorly efficient building or home is the biggest contributor to any energy consumption within the home. Most buildings built before 1990 were subject to vastly different building regulations to what we have now. And as you can see, an uninsulated wall contributes to around 35% of the total heat loss when we're looking at a building. So at RBKC, we're looking at the fuel poverty challenges and what we can do about that. We have a housing sustainability and fuel poverty strategy. We've defined 9 areas of sustainability that we as housing management can focus on to improve energy efficiency and environmental outcomes. And this is because of the promises that we made for achieving net zero by 2020 and 2050 to ensure that our residents are able to live in adequate housing, warm homes at an affordable cost. So we are supporting our council commitment to address fuel poverty by improving heating and energy efficiency and trying to reduce the residents' bills. And this will include having a 2-pronged approach, improving both the fabric of our buildings and the sources of energies that we supply with them. We have considered other initiatives such as opening community rooms to help residents keep warm and well. It was identified that during looking at all of these processes and the strategies about having a joined up approach to our building improvements and initiating a fabric first approach by doing both the mechanical and electrical and also the fabric first. So it also means that we need to be having a more holistic approach, as well as giving the team the opportunity to plan and produce the best possible approach when delivering these systems, thinking again outside the box and what do we use and what is up and coming in the industry. This just gives an example of the varying types of retrofit measures that we will be looking to use. Not all the measures will be used to achieve our goals, because it's looking at it by a case-to-case basis and using professional experts to help us guide us to the right solutions when considering retrofit and our homes. So what are the challenges to meet the current target? Well, for the UK to meet its carbon reduction targets, a deep retrofit of most existing buildings is required at an estimated cost of more than 60 billion. That's probably going to rise more than that. Housing shortages have had a huge impact on the way the property is being used, as we've touched on earlier. We're looking at using thermal imaging to give us a picture like this example here of one of our blocks, to get a picture of where the building is leaking energy and what areas that we need to focus on in future. We need to look at the choices for residents, but that can also be challenging in that there needs to be a technical balance between being fit for purpose, the time, the cost and quality triangle, and where possible giving our residents choices and working in collaboration with them whilst giving them the choices that we can. We've also got things like grants and financial costs. It can be more costly to retrofit rather than rebuild. And then it's also looking at what funding that we can tap into. There are quite a few at the moment for local authorities that they can apply to, but it is strict criteria and we need to meet and tick all of those boxes. So this is just the 6 phases of the retrofit that we'll be looking at: pre-assessments, risk assessments, dwelling assessments, support from our contractors with expert advice, and then from this design, this will then pull forward all the retrofit stages that we're looking at. And then installation conducted, follow up by monitoring and evaluating and embedding that through all of it. So retrofit can provide huge benefits. It can provide things like financial benefits to the resident, comfort, carbon and social benefits. A good retrofit can also help us prevent health risks from damp and mould and reduce the risk of fuel poverty. It's difficult to know a building until work is underway, so that has to be factored in when we're looking at the planning at the initial stage, because once you start digging or going behind things, or, you know, as we know, sometimes it's the oh my God, we didn't know that that was there, and we have to factor that into time and costs and disruption to the tenants. So with early investigation as much as we can and careful planning at the beginning, that's what we'll be looking at to help the design team looking at flexibility and contingency planning. Older homes and listed buildings, such as the large amount we have at RBKC, can be unpredictable, so we need to really be careful about the contingency plans that we look at and whether there may be variations for the work that we need to consider. We'll always look at lessons learned from any of our previous projects, and this is important when we complete our retrofit programs. We want to know what went well, what could we do better, what can we learn from, and take away any reflection from that. The challenges with retrofit can also be looking at getting residents on board and involved and making sure there's enough attention to detail at the beginning of the project and education around operating the controls. It's all very well if we've put in all of these lovely things to help them reduce their energy costs, but what if they're not operating them? What if the education is not sufficient? Are we installing something that is fit for purpose and fit for their needs as well? Because we need to look at the people aspect of this. It's their homes. We need to look at follow-on support, and that should be planned in for long term and not just short term. We've also got snagging periods and things like that to give an embedding process, and we're going to be looking at energy meters to collect data for the lived-in homes over a 12-month period to then monitor and then report back about the project. So the consequences of getting all this wrong, the what if we do all this and then we're back to square one? Well, retrofitting should offer us almost instant results, but by having a disjointed things that are installed in, it's going to wipe this out. It's not going to be effective for us. So we need to be very mindful at the planning stage and the design stage of our projects, what we are doing and what the outcome and the end goal is going to be for the future. For example, where they say triple glazing is installed in an insulated property, it bolsters air tightness and heat retention, but without appropriate ventilation, moisture is then trapped inside, leading to condensation, leading to damp and mould, and the things that we do not want to do and have after we've done these projects. So I just wanted to touch very quickly about the future, because obviously this session is about this future, and we need to look very carefully and robustly and do our due diligence to find long-term stable technologies. Are we going to look at the past for our future? Will we be going back to the future? I don't mean in the car and But anyway, do we need to maybe look at prefabrication? Do we need to look at styles of building and eco-friendliness that we've done previously? Or perhaps we have a brief window of opportunity here to look back and look at what can be taken forward for the future. Reclaiming historic methods of ensuring building and environmental performance as well. We've also got to be looking to the future about different ways of thinking. We need to be thinking smarter and more than out of the box than ever to look at our investments, but what returns that we can get on them. So for example, solar panels and things like that, could that create a sustainable living in a little pod where it can all be recycled and those sorts of things, self-regulating houses, ventilation and heating around the built form, even panels derived from cocoa crops or, those sorts of technologies and techniques that are coming up. How can we copy methods in other countries and learn from abroad and learn from others within the UK and try and replicate what other countries are doing? Because that's something that we are looking at RBKC. They may have different challenges, but some things might be very similar. We're already seeing things like for the future with retrofit robots designed to get into smaller confines to help seal or insulate buildings. Panasonic is currently developing a robotic suit that will make it easier for a human to lift and carry heavy objects. Dangerous construction jobs in the future might be handled by robots. We've got 3D printing and robot assemblies, which will allow for rapid construction. Ian Pearson, a futurologist with an 85% accurate track record, helped put together a report on what we can expect in the year 2045. Pearson compiled the report with Hewden, a construction equipment rental company, which showed that we can expect to see over the next 30 years in the construction industry fields of advance such as robotics, artificial intelligence, city buildings, and are they bound to become tech savvier, and the vision of an urban bubble to see more collaborated building technology with transportation and things like that. And what about AI, artificial intelligence? What can artificial intelligence teach us? Can it teach us what we need to know and produce innovative ideas to help us? One of the predictions will be that all buildings will be run by artificial intelligence. Personally, it would be like a hello building of Siri. Is that what we're going to be looking at in the future when we look at building those programs? So I'm sorry I've rattled through that really quickly, but I'm conscious of time. So thank you very much for listening about what we're doing at RBKC and what the future might hold.